The iron chains around her wrists felt heavier than the shame burning in Florence Oakley's chest as she stood on the auction block in the center of Placerville, California, watching her own mother count the money from the men gathered below. It was July of 1867, and the summer heat pressed down on the mining town like a suffocating blanket, but Florence felt cold all the way through to her bones. She was 20 years old, and until 3 days ago, she had believed her mother loved her. The crowd of rough-looking men shouted their bids, their eyes roaming over her in ways that made her want to disappear into the dusty wooden planks beneath her feet. Her mother, Margaret Oakley, stood to the side with a hard expression on her weathered face, nodding at each new offer as if she were selling livestock instead of her own daughter. Florence had known they were poor, desperately so after her father died in a mining accident 2 years prior, but she never imagined it would come to this. $500, called out a man with greasy hair and a scar running down his cheek. He wore the clothes of a saloon owner, and Florence had heard the stories about what happened to girls who ended up working in those establishments. Her stomach twisted with fear. $600, countered another man, this one older with cruel eyes that reminded Florence of a snake. He owned a brothel on the edge of town, and everyone knew the women there rarely lived past 30. Her mother's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at the rising prices. Florence wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could do this, but her throat had closed up hours ago when she realized no help was coming. No one in this town would stand up to stop this travesty. Women had few rights, and daughters were considered property in the eyes of many. Her mother had found a loophole in desperation and greed, claiming Florence owed her a debt for raising her and demanding payment through indentured servitude. $700, the saloon owner bid again, stepping closer to the platform. Florence could smell the whiskey on him from where she stood. $1,000. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife, deep and steady. Florence's eyes searched for the speaker and found him standing at the back of the gathered men. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working outdoors. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see a strong jaw and eyes that seemed different from the others. They looked at her face, not at her body. He wore dusty trail clothes and had a pair of revolvers strapped to his hips, but something about his bearing suggested he was more than just another drifter. The crowd murmured in surprise. $1,000 was more money than most of these men saw in a year. $1,200, the brothel owner snapped, clearly annoyed by the competition. $2,000. The tall stranger's voice remained calm, almost casual, as if he were discussing the weather rather than bidding on a human life. Florence's mother looked like she might faint from joy. $2,000 was a fortune. The brothel owner's face turned purple with rage, but he shook his head and backed away. No one else in the crowd could match that price. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the back, Margaret announced quickly, as if afraid the stranger might change his mind. She hurried down from the platform to collect her payment, not even looking back at her daughter. The stranger moved through the crowd with easy confidence. Up close, Florence could see he was younger than she first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting into the sun. When he looked at her, really looked at her, Florence saw something unexpected in his expression: compassion. He counted out the money to her mother without a word, each bill placed deliberately in Margaret's greedy hands. When the transaction was complete, he turned to the man who had been serving as auctioneer and held out his hand. "The key to those chains." The auctioneer, a nervous little man who ran the general store, fumbled with a key ring and passed it over. The stranger climbed onto the platform and approached Florence slowly, as if afraid of startling a wild horse. When he reached her, he unlocked the chains around her wrists with gentle efficiency. The metal fell away, clattering onto the wooden planks. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Florence nodded, not trusting her voice. Her legs felt shaky, but she was damned if she would collapse in front of all these people. The stranger offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His arm was solid and steady beneath her trembling hand. He guided her down from the platform and through the crowd. Men moved aside for him, and Florence noticed how they looked at him with a mixture of respect and wariness. This was someone with a reputation, though whether good or bad, she could not tell. A beautiful Palomino horse waited at the hitching post outside the general store, along with a sturdy bay mare that looked built for long distances. The stranger helped Florence onto the bay with careful hands, then mounted his own horse with the fluid grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Wait," Florence found her voice at last. It came out raspy and uncertain. "Where are you taking me?" He looked at her with those kind eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Florence felt something other than terror. "Anywhere you want to go, miss. You are free." The words did not make sense at first. Florence stared at him, waiting for the cruel punchline, the revelation of what he expected from her in return for his money. But he just sat there on his horse, patient and calm, waiting for her response. "I do not understand," she whispered. "My name is Benjamin Kramer," he said. "I was riding through town, heard about the auction, and figured I had more right to that money than any of those vultures. Nobody should be sold like property, and nobody should have to serve a man they did not choose. So I bought your freedom, and now I am giving it to you. You can go wherever you like. If you have family or friends somewhere, I will take you to them. If you want to head to San Francisco or Sacramento and start fresh, I will give you enough money to get established. The choice is yours." Florence felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in the middle of the street where everyone could see. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." Benjamin shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe I am just a fool with more money than sense. Or maybe I believe people should get to choose their own path. Does the reason matter?" It did and it did not. Florence looked back at the crowd that was dispersing now that the show was over. She caught sight of her mother disappearing into the saloon, probably to celebrate her windfall with whiskey and cards. There was nothing left for her in Placerville. No family, no friends who had been willing to stand up for her, no future worth claiming. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "No family except the woman who just sold me. No money, no prospects. I do not even know what I would do in a city like San Francisco." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "I have a ranch about 2 days' ride from here, up in the foothills. It is not much yet, but I have been building it up for the past 3 years. I could use help with the horses if you are willing to work. I would pay you fair wages and you would have your own cabin, your own space. No strings attached, no obligations beyond honest work for honest pay. You could stay as long as you like, save up money, and decide what you want to do with your future." It sounded too good to be true, but Florence was out of options. She could either trust this stranger who had just spent a fortune to free her, or she could stay in Placerville and hope one of the other men did not decide to try to claim her anyway. Her mother had made it clear she was on her own now. "I know how to work," Florence said, lifting her chin. "I am not afraid of hard labor, and I will earn my keep properly. I do not want charity." "It is not charity if you are working for it," Benjamin replied. "Do we have a deal, Miss Oakley?" "Florence," she said. "If I am going to work for you, you should call me Florence." "Florence." He said her name like it was something valuable, worth holding carefully. "Let us get out of this town. I do not much care for the company." They rode out of Placerville at a steady pace, leaving the dusty mining town behind them. Florence did not look back. There was nothing there she wanted to remember. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they followed a trail that wound up into the hills, surrounded by pine trees and granite outcroppings. The air grew cooler as they climbed, and Florence began to relax slightly in the saddle. Benjamin did not push for conversation, seeming content to ride in comfortable silence. Florence appreciated that. She was not ready to talk about what had happened, was not ready to process the betrayal and fear that still churned in her gut. Instead, she focused on the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the beautiful landscape around them. California could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be breathtaking when you took the time to notice. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Benjamin guided them off the main trail toward a small clearing with a stream running through it. "We will camp here tonight," he announced, dismounting smoothly. "The ranch is still another full day's ride, and I would rather not push the horses in the dark." Florence slid down from her mare, her legs aching from the unfamiliar exercise. She had ridden before, but never for hours at a stretch like this. Benjamin noticed her stiffness and smiled sympathetically. "First long ride. Is it that obvious? You will get used to it. Walk around a bit, stretch your legs. I will get a fire started and see about some food." Florence did as he suggested, walking the perimeter of the clearing while Benjamin efficiently set up camp. He moved with the practiced ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times, building a fire ring from stones, gathering wood, and unpacking supplies from his saddlebags. Within 20 minutes, he had a cheerful fire crackling and coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. "Nothing fancy, I am afraid," he said, handing her a tin plate with beans, salt pork, and hardtack. "Trail food is about function, not flavor." "It is more than I expected," Florence replied honestly. She sat down on a log near the fire and ate slowly, surprised by how hungry she was. Fear had kept her stomach clenched all day, but now that she was away from Placerville and the immediate danger had passed, her body was reminding her she had not eaten since yesterday. Benjamin sat across from her, eating his own food and occasionally feeding bits of jerky to the horses. The fire cast dancing shadows across his face, and Florence found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He had a good face, honest and strong. His hands were calloused from hard work, but they had been gentle when he unlocked her chains. He wore his guns like a man who knew how to use them, but he had not drawn them or threatened anyone in town. He had simply outbid them all and walked away with quiet confidence. "Why did you really do it?" Florence asked suddenly. The question had been burning in her mind all afternoon. $2,000 is a fortune. You could have bought cattle or horses or land. Why spend it on a stranger? Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. "I had a sister once, younger than me by 3 years. Her name was Emma." He paused, swallowing hard. "When I was 19 and she was 16, our parents died in a house fire. We had no other family, no money. I was working as a ranch hand, trying to save up enough to buy our own place someday, but it was not enough. Not nearly enough." Florence's heart clenched. She could already guess where this story was going. A man came along, offered to marry her. He was older, wealthy, and I thought it was the answer to our problems. I encouraged her to accept, told her it would give her security. Benjamin's jaw tightened. He took her to his ranch outside of Bakersfield, and I did not see her again for 2 years. When I finally saved up enough money to go visit, I found out he had worked her like a slave, beat her when she displeased him. She was not his wife, she was his property. "What happened to her?" Florence asked softly. "She died of pneumonia that winter." The bastard did not even call a doctor until it was too late because he said it would cost too much. Benjamin's hands clenched into fists. I was too late to save her, but I swore I would never stand by again and watch someone be treated like property. When I heard about what your mother was doing, I knew I had to act. Maybe I cannot save everyone, but I could save you. Tears rolled down Florence's cheeks now, and she did not try to stop them. "I am so sorry about your sister. That should never have happened to her." "No, it should not have. And what happened to you today should not have happened either. But we cannot change the past. All we can do is try to make better choices going forward." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them and the sound of the stream babbling in the background. Florence felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny spark of hope kindling to life. Benjamin Kramer was a good man in a world that often seemed short on goodness. He had saved her for the right reasons, asking nothing in return except honest work. She could build something from that. She could make a new life. "Tell me about your ranch," she said eventually, wanting to move past the heavy sadness that hung over them. "What is it like?" Benjamin's expression lightened and he leaned back against a rock. "It is in a valley between two ridges, with a creek running right through the property. Good grazing land, plenty of water, and enough flat space to build properly. I have about 200 acres now, and I have been raising horses. Some for ranchers who need working stock, some for the army, and a few fine-blooded animals I am hoping to breed into something special. You do it all yourself. I have 2 men who work for me. Tom is a former cavalry soldier, good with horses and better with a rope. Jesse is younger, still learning, but he has a natural way with the animals. Both of them live in the bunkhouse near the main barn. I have a small house for myself, but I have been building a cabin on the other side of the creek. It was meant to be guest quarters, but it would be perfect for you if you decide to stay. What would I be doing? I have never worked with horses before. I would teach you. Horses need to be fed, groomed, exercised, trained. It is good work if you do not mind getting dirty and being patient. Horses can sense fear and uncertainty, so you have to learn to be confident around them even when you are nervous. I think you have that in you." Florence considered his words. She liked the idea of working with animals, of learning a useful skill. And being on a ranch far from town sounded safe, peaceful. "I want to try. I cannot promise I will be good at it right away, but I will work hard. That is all anyone can ask." Benjamin poured them both more coffee from the pot. "Tomorrow will be a long ride, so we should get some sleep. I have an extra bedroll you can use." He set up her sleeping space a respectful distance from his own, close enough to the fire to stay warm but far enough to give her privacy. Florence wrapped herself in the blankets and stared up at the stars visible through the pine branches overhead. The events of the day felt surreal, like something from a terrible dream and a miraculous rescue all mixed together. She wondered if Benjamin Kramer was real or if she would wake up tomorrow and find herself still on that auction block. But when morning came, he was still there, already up and tending to the fire. He handed her a cup of coffee and a simple breakfast of fried cornmeal cakes with honey, and they broke camp with efficient teamwork. The sun was just clearing the mountains when they set out again, following trails that climbed higher into the foothills. The landscape changed as they rode, becoming more rugged and wild. Florence saw deer grazing in meadows and heard the cry of hawks circling overhead. The air smelled of pine sap and wildflowers. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. She had spent most of her life in Placerville, where the world smelled of dust and desperation. This felt like a different world entirely. Benjamin pointed out landmarks as they rode, teaching her the lay of the land. That peak to the north is Thunder Mountain. If you can see snow on it, a storm is coming within 2 days. The river that runs through the valley feeds off snowmelt from up there. Never goes dry, even in the worst summers. "How did you find this place?" Florence asked. "Luck and stubbornness. I worked as a cowboy for years after Emma died, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying long. I was angry at the world and at myself. Then one day I was driving cattle through this valley and realized I had been running away when what I really wanted was to build something permanent, something good. So I asked around, found out the land was available and filed a claim. Been here ever since. You ever get lonely?" Benjamin glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Sometimes. It is a quiet life and I am not much for town socializing, but I have the horses and Tom and Jessie are good company. It is enough most days." Florence heard the unspoken truth in his words. It was enough, but not fulfilling. Benjamin Kramer had built himself a sanctuary, but it was also a kind of prison. He was hiding from the world just as much as he was creating something new. She understood that impulse better than he probably realized. They stopped at midday to water the horses and eat a quick lunch. Florence's muscles were screaming in protest from another day in the saddle, but she refused to complain. She had told Benjamin she was not afraid of hard work, and she meant it. If she was going to make a new life for herself, she needed to prove she could handle whatever challenges came her way. As they continued riding, Benjamin began to talk more about the ranch, describing the layout and the daily routines. Florence listened carefully, committing every detail to memory. She would be walking into an established operation, and she needed to learn quickly if she wanted to pull her weight. The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a final ridge, and Benjamin pulled his horse to a stop. "There it is. Welcome to the Kramer Ranch." Florence drew up beside him and caught her breath. The valley below was everything he had described and more. The land rolled gently between 2 pine-covered ridges, with a silver ribbon of creek winding through the center. She could see several buildings clustered near a grove of oak trees, corrals full of horses, and fields of golden grass rippling in the breeze. It looked like something out of a painting, peaceful and perfect. "It is beautiful," Florence said, and meant it with all her heart. Benjamin's face lit up with quiet pride. "It is home. Come on, let me introduce you to the others." They rode down into the valley as the setting sun painted everything in gold and amber. As they approached the main buildings, Florence saw 2 men emerge from the barn. One was older, perhaps in his 40s, with iron-gray hair and a military bearing. The other was younger, maybe early 20s, with sandy hair and a friendly face. "Benjamin," the younger one called out, "we were starting to worry. You were supposed to be back yesterday." "Got delayed in town," Benjamin replied, dismounting. He helped Florence down from her horse with steady hands. "Tom, Jessie, this is Florence Oakley. She will be working with us from now on. Florence, this is Tom Bridger and Jessie Cole." Tom studied Florence with sharp eyes that missed nothing, but his voice was polite when he spoke. "Madam." "Welcome to the ranch." Jessie was less restrained, grinning broadly. "Good to have another person around. Gets too quiet with just us 3 old grumps." "I am only 27, Benjamin protested mildly. "Ancient," Jessie teased. Florence found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. There was an easy camaraderie between the 3 men that spoke of mutual respect and genuine friendship. This was a good place, she could feel it. "Florence will be staying in the guest cabin," Benjamin continued. "Jessie, can you help me get it ready? Tom, would you see to the horses?" "Sure thing, boss," Tom said, taking the reins of both horses. He nodded to Florence again before leading the animals toward the barn. The cabin was small but well built, with solid log walls and a stone chimney. Inside, Florence found a single room with a bed frame, a small table, 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove. It was simple and plain, but it had good bones. Benjamin and Jesse worked quickly to make it livable, bringing in a mattress, blankets, dishes, and other necessities from storage. "It is not fancy," Benjamin said, looking around with a critical eye. "But it is solid and it will keep you warm and dry. Tomorrow we can see if there is anything else you need." "It is perfect," Florence assured him, and it was. This small cabin was hers, a space where she could be safe and independent. After spending the night on an auction block, it felt like a palace. Jesse brought over a basket of food. Nothing fancy, but Tom made stew earlier and there is fresh bread. Breakfast is usually at sunrise in the main house. "You are welcome to join us or cook for yourself, whatever you prefer." "I will join you," Florence said. She did not want to hide away in her cabin like a frightened rabbit. If she was going to be part of this ranch, she needed to be part of the community. After the men left, Florence sat on the edge of her new bed and let the reality of the past 2 days wash over her. She had been sold by her own mother, bought by a stranger, and freed within the same day. Now she was sitting in her own cabin on a horse ranch in the California foothills, about to start a completely new life. It was overwhelming and terrifying and strangely exciting all at once. She thought about Benjamin, about the pain in his voice when he spoke of his sister and the quiet pride when he showed her his ranch. He was a complicated man, scarred by tragedy but trying to build something good from the ashes. She respected that. More than respected it, she found herself drawn to it in ways she did not fully understand yet. Florence stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the darkening valley. Stars were beginning to appear overhead, brilliant and clear in the mountain air. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in days, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The next morning, Florence woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through her window. Her body ached from 2 days of hard riding, but she forced herself up and dressed in the same clothes she had been wearing since the auction. She would need new clothes soon, work clothes suitable for ranch life. That was just one more thing on a long list of needs. She made her way to the main house, following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. The house was larger than her cabin, a sturdy 2-story building with a wide porch. Inside, she found a spacious kitchen where Tom was working at the stove and Jesse was setting the table. Benjamin was nowhere in sight. "Morning," Tom said greatly. "Benjamin is out checking on a mare that was showing signs of foaling. Should be back shortly. Coffee is fresh." Florence poured herself a cup and sat at the table, taking in the comfortable disorder of the kitchen. It was clearly a space used by men who knew their way around cooking but did not worry too much about neatness. Somehow that made it more welcoming than if it had been pristine. Jesse sat down across from her with his own coffee. "So, you know anything about horses?" "Not much," Florence admitted. "I rode sometimes in town but never worked with them." "That is all right. They are good animals, smarter than most people give them credit for. Main thing is to be consistent and patient. Benjamin is a great teacher. He taught me everything I know." "How long have you been here?" "About a year. I was working at a ranch down near Stockton, but the owner was a mean drunk who beat his animals. I could not stomach it anymore, so I left. Heard Benjamin was looking for help and came up here. Best decision I ever made." Tom joined them at the table with plates of food. "Benjamin treats his people right and his animals better. You will do well here if you are willing to learn." The door opened and Benjamin walked in, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses. His face was lit with excitement. The mare foaled during the night. We have a healthy colt, strong legs, and good conformation. Tom, I will need you to check them both over after breakfast. Will do, boss. Benjamin noticed Florence and his expression softened. Morning. Did you sleep all right? Very well, thank you. He poured himself coffee and sat down with a plate of food. I was thinking you could spend today getting oriented, learning where everything is and how we operate. No heavy work yet, just observation. Tomorrow we will start teaching you the basics. Florence nodded, grateful for his consideration. She watched as the four of them ate breakfast together, the conversation flowing easily around topics of horses, weather, and ranch business. It felt strange to be included in this, to be treated as an equal rather than a burden or a commodity. She found herself relaxing, the knot of tension in her chest loosening slightly. After breakfast, Benjamin took her on a tour of the ranch. He showed her the main barn, which housed the breeding stock and any animals that needed special care. The building was immaculate, with fresh straw in every stall and tack hanging neatly on the walls. Everything spoke of care and pride in the work. These are my foundation mares, Benjamin explained, introducing her to a row of beautiful horses. I bought them from different breeders, looking for specific traits. Good bone structure, intelligence, steady temperament. I am trying to build a line of horses that are versatile enough for ranch work but refined enough for show. Florence reached out tentatively to stroke the nose of a dappled gray mare. The horse whuffed softly and leaned into her touch. She is beautiful. That is Silver Cloud. She is one of my best. Her foals always have excellent temperaments. Benjamin moved to the next stall. And this is the new mother, Rosie. The chestnut mare stood protectively over a wobbly-legged colt. The baby was all legs and big eyes with a white star on his forehead. Florence felt her heart melt at the sight. He is perfect. He will be a fine horse someday. Assuming he figures out how to coordinate all those legs. Benjamin's voice was warm with affection. They continued the tour, visiting the training corrals, the pastures where the horses grazed, and the smaller barn where feed and equipment were stored. Benjamin explained the daily routine horses needed to be fed morning and evening, stalls mucked out daily, water troughs checked and refilled, tack cleaned and maintained, training sessions with the young horses, exercise for the breeding stock. It is a lot of work, he said honestly. Dawn to dusk most days and sometimes longer during foaling season, but it is good work, rewarding. I am not afraid of hard work, Florence repeated. I want to contribute. I know you do, and you will. Benjamin looked at her seriously. But I also want you to understand that you are free to leave whenever you want. You do not owe me anything. If you decide this life is not for you, I will give you enough money to start fresh somewhere else. No judgment, no hard feelings. Why do you keep saying that? Florence asked, frustration creeping into her voice. Do you want me to leave? No, Benjamin said quickly. But I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you feel obligated. There is a difference. Florence met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. He really meant it. After spending 20 years with a mother who saw her as nothing but a burden and a potential profit, it was almost impossible to comprehend someone who expected nothing from her. But Benjamin Kramer was exactly that kind of person. He had given her freedom, and now he was trying to make sure she understood what that actually meant. I choose to stay, Florence said firmly. At least for now. I want to learn, I want to work, and I want to see if I can build something here. That is my choice, freely made. A slow smile spread across Benjamin's face, and Florence felt her heart skip a beat. When he smiled like that, he was devastatingly handsome. Good. I am glad. They spent the rest of the morning together, Benjamin introducing her to the various horses and explaining their personalities and quirks. He had names and stories for all of them, treating each animal as an individual. Florence was struck by how gentle he was with them, his big hands capable of surprising delicacy. By afternoon, Florence was exhausted from walking and taking in so much new information. Benjamin seemed to sense her flagging energy. "That is enough for today. Why do not you rest for a bit? We will have dinner around 6. Florence returned to her cabin and collapsed on the bed, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. The ranch was more complex than she had imagined, a careful balance of animal husbandry, business management, and hard physical labor. But she found herself excited rather than daunted. This was something she could learn, a skill she could master. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Benjamin's smile and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he talked about his horses. He was a good man, maybe the best man she had ever known. She would have to be careful not to read too much into his kindness. He had saved her out of principle, not because he had any romantic interest in her. She needed to remember that. The days fell into a rhythm. Florence woke before dawn and joined the men for breakfast, then spent her mornings learning the basics of horse care from Benjamin. He was a patient teacher, showing her how to approach a horse, how to read their body language, how to groom them properly. Her hands, soft from years of indoor work, quickly developed blisters and then calluses. Her muscles ached constantly at first, but gradually grew stronger. Jessie taught her how to muck out stalls efficiently, turning what seemed like an endless, disgusting task into something manageable. Tom showed her how to mix feed rations and check horses for signs of illness or injury. Each man contributed to her education, and Florence soaked it all up like a sponge. But it was Benjamin's lessons she looked forward to most. He had a way of explaining things that made sense to her, and his passion for the horses was contagious. When he put her on the back of a gentle older mare and taught her proper riding technique, Florence felt like she was flying. When he showed her how to lunge a young horse in the training corral, teaching it to respond to voice commands, she felt the thrill of genuine accomplishment. "You are a natural," Benjamin said one afternoon, as Florence successfully guided a 2-year-old gelding through a series of gaits. "You have good instincts with them." Florence flushed with pleasure at the praise. She had been at the ranch for 3 weeks now, and every day she felt more competent, more confident. The terrified girl who had stood on the auction block was fading, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who was building a life she actually wanted. As the weeks turned into months, Florence found herself settling into ranch life completely. She acquired proper work clothes, traded for with eggs and vegetables from the garden she had started behind her cabin. Her hands were permanently rough now, her skin tanned from long days outdoors. She learned to anticipate the needs of the horses, to spot problems before they became serious, to work alongside the men as a true partner in the enterprise. But something else was growing too, something Florence tried hard to ignore. She was falling for Benjamin Kramer. It happened in small moments. The way he laughed at Jessie's terrible jokes, the gentleness in his voice when he talked to a nervous horse, the quiet competence with which he managed the ranch, making decisions that were always fair and well considered. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression she could not quite read. Florence told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of him being kind to her when she needed it most. But gratitude did not explain the way her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched while working. It did not explain the disappointment she felt on the rare occasions when Benjamin went into town without her. It did not explain the dreams she was having, dreams where his kiss was as gentle and certain as everything else about him. She tried to hide her feelings, terrified that Benjamin would notice and send her away. He had given her freedom, and she was repaying him by developing an unwanted infatuation. It was wrong and foolish and entirely inappropriate. He was her employer, her benefactor, her teacher. He saw her as a responsibility, not a romantic prospect, or so she thought. It was October when everything changed. The weather had turned cooler, and the leaves on the oak trees were beginning to turn gold. Benjamin had taken a string of horses to sell at a ranch near Sacramento, leaving Tom in charge. He was supposed to be gone for 5 days, but he returned after only 3, riding hard and arriving just as the sun was setting. Florence was in the barn, checking on a mare that had seemed off her feed when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She emerged to see Benjamin dismounting, his face grim. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "I heard news in Sacramento. Your mother is dead." Florence went very still. She had not thought about Margaret Oakley in months, had successfully pushed the woman out of her mind. "What happened?" "She got into a fight at the saloon, pulled a knife on someone. Man she attacked had a gun. It was self-defense, according to the sheriff." Benjamin's voice was carefully neutral. "I thought you should know." Florence waited for some emotion to hit her: grief, relief, anger, something. But all she felt was a strange emptiness. "Thank you for telling me. The sheriff asked if you wanted to claim the body for burial. I told him I would ask you." "No." The word came out flat and final. "She sold me to the highest bidder. She stopped being my mother the day she put me on that auction block. Let the town bury her or not, I do not care." Benjamin studied her face in the fading light. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," Florence admitted. "I should feel something, should not I? But I just feel empty. Is that wrong?" "No," Benjamin said gently. "You feel how you feel. There are no rules for this." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the evening settling around them. Then Benjamin did something unexpected. He reached out and pulled Florence into a hug, wrapping his strong arms around her and holding her close. Florence stiffened in surprise, then melted against him, burying her face in his chest. He smelled of horse and leather and something essentially Benjamin, and she felt tears begin to fall despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I am sorry," she mumbled against his shirt. "I am getting you all wet. I do not care." His voice rumbled in his chest, low and comforting. "Cry as much as you need to." So she did, letting out months of suppressed emotion, the betrayal, the fear, the anger, the grief for the mother she had never really had. Benjamin held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. When the storm finally passed, Florence pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I am sorry," she said again. "You did not sign up for this." "Florence, look at me." Benjamin waited until she met his eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for, nothing. What your mother did to you was unforgivable, and you have every right to feel however you feel about her death." "I thought I would be happy to hear she was gone," Florence confessed. "I thought it would feel like justice, but it just feels sad. She wasted her whole life chasing money and whiskey, and she died alone in a dirty saloon. What a terrible waste. That was her choice, not yours. You chose differently. You chose to build something better." Florence looked up at Benjamin, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a woman he cares about, with tenderness and desire and something deeper. Hope fluttered to life in her chest. "Benjamin," she whispered. "I am trying very hard to be honorable about this," he said, his voice rough. "You work for me. You are dependent on me for your livelihood. The power dynamic is all wrong. But God help me, Florence, I cannot stop thinking about you. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. I keep finding excuses to work near you, to teach you things, just so I can spend more time with you." Florence's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Benjamin, let me finish," he interrupted. "I do not want you to feel obligated to reciprocate just because you work here or because I bought your freedom. If you do not feel the same way, nothing has to change. You can stay or go, whatever you want. I will not make things awkward or uncomfortable. I just need you to know that my feelings are genuine and they are not going away." Florence reached up and placed her hand on his cheek, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "You foolish man. I have been falling for you since the day you unlocked those chains. I was just too scared to admit it." Benjamin's eyes widened. "You have? How could I not? You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known. You saved me, not just from that auction, but from giving up on life entirely. You showed me that I could be more than what my mother made me believe I was. You gave me a home and a purpose," and her voice broke slightly. "And you made me believe I was worth something." "You are worth everything," Benjamin said fiercely. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears still clinging to her cheeks. "You are smart and strong and brave. You work harder than anyone I have ever known. You have this incredible kindness despite everything that was done to you. Florence Oakley, you are extraordinary." "Kiss me," Florence whispered. Benjamin did not need to be asked twice. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, then deeper as Florence responded with enthusiasm. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and felt Benjamin's arms tighten around her waist. The kiss was everything she had dreamed of and more, warm and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for months." "So have I," Florence admitted. "But I thought you just saw me as a responsibility." "You were never a responsibility. From the moment I saw you standing on that platform, trying so hard to be brave despite your terror, I was lost. I told myself I was doing the right thing, the honorable thing, but the truth is I could not bear the thought of you belonging to anyone else." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "Is this really what you want? Because once we start down this path, I am not going to want to let you go." "Good," Florence said, pulling him back down for another kiss. "Because I am not going anywhere." They stood in the gathering darkness, holding each other close, while the stars began to appear overhead. Inside the barn, horses shuffled and whickered softly. From the bunkhouse, they could hear the faint sounds of Tom and Jesse talking. The ranch carried on around them, steady and familiar, while everything between Florence and Benjamin shifted into something new and wonderful. Eventually, they walked hand in hand back to the main house, where they found Tom and Jesse playing cards at the kitchen table. The two men took one look at their joined hands and clasped faces and grinned knowingly. "About damn time," Jesse said cheerfully. "We have been taking bets on how long it would take you two to figure it out." "Who won?" Benjamin asked, trying to sound stern but failing completely. "Tom. He said you would crack by November. I thought you would hold out until Christmas." "You two are terrible," Florence said, but she was laughing. Tom stood and extended his hand to Benjamin, then to Florence. "Seriously though, congratulations. You are good for each other." The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Benjamin and Florence navigated their new relationship with the same care and consideration they brought to everything else. They took things slowly, getting to know each other not just as employer and employee or savior and rescued, but as partners. They talked for hours about their dreams, their pasts, their hopes for the future. Benjamin told her more about his sister Emma, and Florence shared memories of her father, who had been a good man trapped in a life of poverty and hard labor. By the time winter arrived, blanketing the valley in snow, Benjamin and Florence were inseparable. They worked side by side during the day, teaching a new crop of young horses, caring for the breeding stock and planning for spring. In the evenings, they sat by the fire in the main house, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. On Christmas Eve, Benjamin took Florence for a ride up to a high meadow where they could see the entire valley spread below them. The snow glittered in the moonlight and their breath formed clouds in the cold air. Benjamin dismounted and helped Florence down, then took both her hands in his. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice nervous in a way she had never heard before. Florence's heart began to race. "Yes." Benjamin reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we have not been courting for very long by traditional standards, but nothing about us has been traditional from the start. Florence, you are my partner in every sense of the word. You make me laugh, you challenge me to be better, you work harder than anyone I have ever known. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Will you marry me?" Florence looked at the ring, then at Benjamin's face and felt her eyes fill with happy tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Benjamin slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that warmed her from head to toe despite the freezing temperature. When they finally broke apart, Florence was laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you, Benjamin Kramer," she said. "I love you too, Florence Oakley, soon to be Florence Kramer." They were married in March of 1868 in a simple ceremony at a small church in a nearby town. Tom and Jessie served as witnesses, along with the minister and his wife. Florence wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Benjamin wore his best suit. They exchanged vows in front of God and their friends, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors from the surrounding homesteads coming to celebrate. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Florence looked around at the community that had embraced her, at the life she had built from nothing, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year ago, she had been standing on an auction block, certain her life was over. Now she was married to a man she loved beyond measure, surrounded by friends with a home and purpose that made her happy every single day. As she and Benjamin danced together under the stars, Florence thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and betrayal of her mother's actions would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had chosen to build something better, something beautiful. And Benjamin had chosen to stand beside her every step of the way. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "How lucky I am," Florence replied honestly. "How strange life is. If someone had told me last July that I would end the year as a married woman on a horse ranch, happy and loved, I would have thought they were crazy." "I am the lucky one," Benjamin countered. "I spent years building this ranch, but it was not really a home until you came. You made it complete." "We made it complete," Florence corrected. "Together." "Together," Benjamin agreed and kissed her under the stars while their friends cheered. The years that followed were full and rich. Florence became an expert horsewoman, developing a reputation in the region for her skill in training young horses. She had a particular gift for working with difficult or traumatized animals, approaching them with patience and understanding born from her own experiences. The Kramer ranch prospered, their horses sought after by ranchers and cavalry officers alike. In the spring of 1869, Florence discovered she was pregnant. Benjamin was overjoyed, immediately becoming overprotective and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. Florence had to firmly remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and that women had been working through pregnancies since the dawn of time. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with Benjamin's dark hair and Florence's green eyes. They named him Thomas Henry Kramer, after Tom, who had become like family to them, and Henry after Florence's father. Little Thomas was adored by everyone on the ranch, with Tom and Jesse competing to be his favorite uncle. Florence took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She learned to balance caring for an infant with ranch work, often carrying Thomas in a sling while she went about her chores. Benjamin was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about horses before he could even walk. In 1871, Florence gave birth to their daughter, Emma Grace Kramer, named after Benjamin's beloved sister. Emma had her mother's red gold hair and her father's warm brown eyes. She was a spirited child from the start, fearless and curious about everything. Benjamin cried when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the chance to honor his sister's memory in such a beautiful way. The ranch continued to grow. They added more land, more horses, and eventually built a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Tom retired from heavy ranch work, but stayed on as a valued advisor and surrogate grandfather to the children. Jesse eventually married a schoolteacher from town and built his own small ranch on adjacent land, remaining close friends and business partners with Benjamin. Florence never forgot where she came from or how close she had come to a very different life. She became an advocate for women's rights in the territory, particularly fighting against the kinds of legal loopholes that had allowed her mother to sell her. She helped other women escape bad situations when she could, offering work or temporary shelter at the ranch. Benjamin supported these efforts completely, proud of his wife's compassion and strength. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin and Florence rode back up to the meadow where he had proposed. Their children were staying with Tom for the night, giving the couple a rare evening alone. They sat on a blanket, watching the sun set over the valley that had become their home in every sense of the word. "You ever regret it?" Florence asked. "Spending all that money on a stranger?" Benjamin looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Are you joking?" "That was the best investment I ever made. I got you out of the deal. $2,000 is still a lot of money. Florence, you have given me everything that matters. A home full of love, beautiful children, a partnership that makes every day better. If I could go back, I would pay 10 times that amount and count myself blessed." He took her hand, running his thumb over her wedding ring. "Besides, you have more than earned your keep around here. You are the best horse trainer in 3 counties, Florence laughed. Tom might argue with that assessment. Tom would agree with me. Everyone would. Benjamin grew more serious. "I mean it, Florence. You are extraordinary. You took the worst experience of your life and turned it into something beautiful. You built this life through sheer determination and courage." "I am honored to be your husband." "I could not have done any of it without you," Florence said softly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You loved me when I did not think I was worthy of love." "You were always worthy," Benjamin said fiercely. "Always. Your mother was the one who was broken, not you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their proposal, their wedding, and every important moment of their life together. Florence thought about the girl she had been, standing on that auction block, terrified and alone. That girl would never believe the life Florence had now: a loving husband, healthy children, a home she adored, work that fulfilled her, and respect from her community. Sometimes, late at night, Florence still had nightmares about that day. She would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the weight of the chains on her wrists, hearing her mother's voice as she counted the money. But then Benjamin would pull her close, murmuring reassurances until she calmed, and she would remember that she was safe. She was home. She was loved. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's love of horses and his mother's compassion. He was 14 when he announced he wanted to become a veterinarian, having been inspired by Tom's knowledge of animal medicine. Benjamin and Florence supported his dream wholeheartedly, making arrangements for him to apprentice with a veterinarian in Sacramento. Emma was 12 and already showing signs of being a skilled horsewoman in her own right. She was fearless in the saddle and had a gift for connecting with difficult horses. She also had her mother's strong sense of justice and a tendency to champion underdogs, whether animal or human. Florence saw so much of herself in her daughter and was determined to raise her to believe in her own worth and power. In 1880, Florence gave birth to their third child, a surprise baby they had not been expecting. Another son, they named him Samuel James Kramer, and he completed their family. Samuel was a happy, easygoing baby who seemed content to be carried around the ranch and watch everything happening around him. Benjamin was 41 now, with silver beginning to show in his dark hair. Florence was 34, still beautiful, still strong, still the center of his world. They had built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch, but a true partnership based on mutual respect, trust, and deep love. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Benjamin reflected on the strange path that had led them here. "Do you remember what I told you that first day, that you were free to go anywhere you wanted?" "I remember," Florence said, smiling. "You gave me a choice when I thought I had none left, and you chose to stay." Benjamin shook his head in wonder. "I won the lottery that day in Placerville, and I did not even know it." "We both won," Florence corrected. "We found each other when we both needed it most. You needed someone to make your house a home, and I needed someone to show me I was worth more than what my mother believed. We saved each other." "I like that," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "We saved each other." Florence rested her head on his shoulder, watching as Thomas helped his little brother with a rope trick and Emma brushed down her favorite horse in the corral. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and peaceful. The creek sang its eternal song and the mountains stood guard over their valley. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had chosen and built with her own two hands. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined on that terrible day when everything had seemed lost. Benjamin kissed the top of her head, and Florence closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of him, of home, of love. They had come so far from that auction block in Placerville, from those early days of uncertainty and fear. They had built something lasting and true, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. "I love you," Florence murmured. "I love you too," Benjamin replied. "Always and forever." The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Their children's laughter rang out across the ranch, joyful and free. And Florence Kramer, who had once been sold to the highest bidder, sat safely in the arms of the man who had loved her enough to set her free, knowing that she had finally found where she belonged. The ranch thrived through the 1880s, becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Northern California. Florence's training methods, based on patience and understanding rather than breaking spirits, became sought after. Ranchers from as far as Oregon and Nevada sent their difficult horses to her, knowing she could help them. She charged fair prices and gained a reputation not just for skill but for integrity. Benjamin expanded their breeding program, carefully selecting stallions and mares to produce horses with specific qualities. Their animals were known for intelligence, stamina, and gentle temperaments qualities that made them valuable for both work and family use. The Kramer brand became synonymous with quality. As their children grew, each found their own path while remaining connected to the ranch. Thomas completed his apprenticeship and returned to the valley as a veterinarian, building a practice that served the entire region. He married a minister's daughter named Sarah, and they built a house near the main ranch. Florence was overjoyed to have her son close, and even more so when Thomas and Sarah gave her 2 grandchildren. Emma, true to her independent nature, announced at 16 that she wanted to become a horse trainer like her mother. Florence taught her everything she knew, and by the time Emma was 20, she was nearly as skilled as her mother. She had a particular gift with wild horses, approaching them with a fearlessness tempered by respect. She eventually married a former cavalry officer named Robert Williams, who shared her love of horses. They built their own training operation on a section of land Benjamin deeded to them, working closely with the main ranch. Samuel, the youngest, was different from his siblings. He loved the ranch and the horses, but his true passion was for building and mechanics. He was fascinated by the new technologies emerging in the late 19th century and spent his free time tinkering with designs for better equipment. Benjamin encouraged this interest, recognizing that ranching was changing and Samuel's skills would be valuable in the modern age. By 1890, Benjamin was 51 and Florence was 43. They had been married for 22 years, and their love had only deepened with time. They still worked side by side on the ranch, though they had more help now and could afford to take an occasional day off. They liked to ride up to their special meadow, the place where Benjamin had proposed all those years ago, and spend the afternoon together away from the demands of ranch life. It was on one of these rides that Florence brought up something that had been on her mind. "I have been thinking about writing a book." Benjamin looked at her with interest. "About what?" "About horse training, specifically my methods. I get so many questions from people, and I thought it might be useful to have everything written down. Not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. The idea that you do not have to break a spirit to get cooperation." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Benjamin said immediately. "You have so much knowledge and experience. It would be a shame not to share it." "You do not think people would dismiss it because it is written by a woman?" "Some might," Benjamin admitted, "but plenty more would recognize its value. And honestly, who cares what the narrow-minded ones think? You have proven yourself 100 times over. Write the book." So Florence did. She spent the next year working on her manuscript in the evenings, documenting everything she had learned about training horses with patience and respect. She included specific techniques, case studies from her years of work, and her underlying philosophy about the importance of building trust with animals. The book, titled Understanding the Horse, A Guide to Compassionate Training, was published in 1892 by a small press in San Francisco. It was not a bestseller, but it found a devoted audience among progressive horse trainers and earned Florence invitations to speak at various agricultural fairs and conventions. She traveled occasionally to give demonstrations, always with Benjamin by her side as her biggest supporter. One afternoon in the spring of 1895, Florence was working with a particularly challenging mare when a visitor arrived at the ranch. The woman was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with a worn appearance that reminded Florence painfully of her own younger self. She approached hesitantly, clearly nervous. "Can I help you?" Florence asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Are you Florence Kramer, the one who wrote the book about horse training?" "I am." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry to bother you, but I did not know where else to go. My name is Catherine. My husband died 6 months ago, leaving me with a ranch I do not know how to run. The bank is threatening to foreclose unless I can make it profitable, but I do not know anything about horses. I read your book and thought maybe if you had time you could teach me. I can pay not much, but something." Florence saw herself in this young woman, desperate, scared, but trying to be brave. She did not hesitate. "Come inside. Let us talk." Over tea in the kitchen, Catherine told her story. She had married young to escape an abusive father, only to lose her husband to illness. Now she was alone on a failing ranch with creditors circling. She had a few horses, but no idea how to train or sell them. She was running out of time and options. "How long do you have before the bank forecloses?" Florence asked. 3 months. "That is not much time." Florence thought for a moment. "But it might be enough if you are willing to work hard. Here is what I propose. You stay here at the ranch for those 3 months. I will teach you everything I can about training and selling horses. You will work for your room and board, and at the end, we will see if we can find buyers for your horses at fair prices. It will be intense, and you will earn every bit of knowledge, but I will give you the tools to save your ranch." Catherine's face transformed with hope. "You would do that for me?" "I would, because someone once did something similar for me when I needed it most. Pay it forward, that is all I ask." Benjamin fully supported Florence's plan when she told him that evening. "You have a good heart," he said, kissing her cheek. "One of the many reasons I love you." Catherine proved to be a dedicated student. She absorbed everything Florence taught her with single-minded intensity. She was not a natural with horses the way Emma was, but she worked harder than anyone Florence had ever taught. She was in the barn before dawn and often worked by lantern light in the evenings. Florence saw her own determination reflected in this young woman and pushed her to be even better. At the end of 3 months, Catherine's horses were well trained and ready for sale. Florence used her connections to find buyers, and Catherine made enough money to pay off her debts and keep her ranch. When she left, she hugged Florence tightly. "You saved my life," Catherine said, crying. "I will never forget this." "You saved yourself," Florence replied. "I just gave you the tools. Now go build something wonderful." This experience inspired Florence to start a program at the ranch. She would take on 1 or 2 students each year, usually women in difficult situations who needed skills and opportunities. She taught them horse training, ranch management, and most importantly, self-reliance. Benjamin supported the program completely, often helping find employment or opportunities for her graduates. The turn of the century found the Kramer ranch still thriving. Benjamin was 61 now, his hair more silver than brown, but he was still strong and vital. Florence was 53, with lines around her eyes that came from years of squinting into the sun and laughing with her family. They had 6 grandchildren now, with a 7th on the way, and their original modest ranch had grown into a small empire. But for all their success and prosperity, what mattered most to both of them was the life they had built together. Every morning, Benjamin still brought Florence coffee in bed. Every evening, they still sat together on the porch and talked about their day. They still rode up to their meadow on special occasions. They still held hands like newlyweds. The love that had begun on an auction block in Placerville had grown into something deep and unshakable, a bond that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. In the spring of 1902, Florence and Benjamin celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary with their entire family gathered at the ranch. 3 generations of Kramers filled the house and yard, children running everywhere, babies being passed from arm to arm, grandchildren begging for horse rides, and the sound of laughter echoing off the mountains. As Florence looked around at the chaos and joy, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this family, this love, all of it had seemed impossible once. She had been a girl with no future, sold by her own mother, facing a life of degradation and despair. But one man's act of compassion had changed everything. Benjamin found her standing alone for a moment, watching the party with tears in her eyes. "What is wrong?" he asked with concern. "Nothing is wrong," Florence assured him. "Everything is so right it almost hurts. I was just thinking about that day in Placerville, about how different my life could have been." "Do not think about that," Benjamin said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Think about this instead. Think about the life we built together." "I do, every day. And I am grateful for every moment." Florence turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me everything, Benjamin. A home, a family, a purpose, love. You showed me that I was worth saving." "You did the same for me," Benjamin replied seriously. "I was just going through the motions before you came. Building a ranch, but not really living. You brought joy and meaning to everything. You made me believe in second chances and happy endings." They kissed, a sweet lingering kiss that held 34 years of love and partnership. Around them, their family continued to celebrate, but for that moment, it was just the two of them, the cowboy and the woman he had set free, still choosing each other every single day. As the sun set over the valley, painting everything in gold and rose, Florence reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her here. She had been sold as property, but she had become so much more: a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a successful businesswoman, an author, a teacher, a friend. She had taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the foundation for something beautiful. The ranch would continue after they were gone, she knew. Their children and grandchildren would carry on the Kramer legacy, breeding fine horses and treating both animals and people with respect and compassion. The values she and Benjamin had built this place on would endure. But more than that, the love story that had begun on an auction block in Placerville, California in 1867 would endure too. It would be told and retold by their descendants, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope is possible. That one act of kindness can change everything. That love, real love, is worth every risk. Benjamin squeezed her hand and Florence squeezed back, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as familiar as breathing. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. They had built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. And as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their proposal, their wedding, and every important moment since, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, loved, free. And surrounded by the family she and Benjamin had created together through courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to choosing love every single day. The years continued to pass gently at the Kramer ranch. Benjamin and Florence gradually handed over more of the daily operations to their children, though neither could fully step away from the work they loved. They still consulted on breeding decisions, still worked with the occasional difficult horse, still taught the students who came seeking Florence's expertise. In 1908, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that lasted 3 days. Friends and family came from all over California to honor the couple who had become legends in their own right, not just for their success in horse breeding, but for the way they lived their lives with integrity and compassion. Florence was 61 now, her red gold hair threaded with silver, but she still moved with grace and energy. Benjamin was 69, slower than he once was but still strong, still devoted to his wife and their life together. They had been blessed with remarkably good health and the kind of deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when Benjamin had first brought Florence to the ranch all those years ago, they rode up to their meadow one last time. Both of them were feeling their age more keenly these days, and they knew there might not be many more trips like this. They sat on their old blanket, watching the sun paint the valley in familiar colors. Benjamin took Florence's hand, studying the way their fingers fit together perfectly after so many years. "You remember what I told you that first night on the trail?" he asked. "That you were free to go anywhere you wanted." "I remember everything about those days," Florence replied. "They changed my entire life. If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything?" Florence thought about the question seriously. "I would spare us both some pain if I could. I would save your sister, stop my mother from becoming what she was, but our journey together. I would not change a single moment. Every joy, every challenge, every choice we made brought us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Benjamin said softly. "I used to think my purpose in life was to build this ranch to create something lasting, but I was wrong. My purpose was to find you, to love you, to build a life together. Everything else was just details." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "We did build something lasting, though, not just the ranch, but this love, our family. The values we passed on to our children and grandchildren. That is what endures." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, holding each other close. Below them, the ranch lights began to glow in the gathering darkness. They could hear the faint sounds of their family: Thomas calling to his children, Emma's laughter, Samuel's voice raised in song. The sounds of home, of love, of life continuing. "Thank you," Florence whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me that day. For believing I was worth saving. For loving me even when I did not know how to love myself. For giving me this beautiful life." Benjamin turned to look at her, and even in the fading light, she could see the love shining in his eyes. "Florence Kramer, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And I would spend that $2,000 1,000 times over just to have one more day with you." They kissed, a sweet, gentle kiss that held 40 years of love and partnership, of trials overcome and joys shared, of a bond that had proven unbreakable. Florence Kramer, who had once stood on an auction block believing her life was over, who had been sold by her own mother and saved by a cowboy's compassion, had found her happily ever after. Not because a man had rescued her, but because she had found the courage to build a new life, and because she had found a partner who believed in equality, respect, and love above all else. The ranch continued to thrive for many more years, eventually being passed down to the third generation of Kramers. Florence's book on horse training was reprinted multiple times and became a standard text in agricultural schools. The program she started to help women learn ranching skills continued, funded by an endowment she and Benjamin established. But more than any of these accomplishments, what Florence and Benjamin created was a love story for the ages. Their descendants told and retold the tale of how Benjamin had outbid everyone at an auction to set a woman free, and how that act of compassion had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. When Benjamin passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Florence held his hand and whispered the same words she had spoken to him so many times before. "I love you, Benjamin Kramer. Thank you for choosing me." And when Florence followed him 3 years later, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, her last words were of gratitude for the beautiful life she had been given, the life that had started with chains and ended with love. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that read, Benjamin Kramer, 1840–1918. Beloved husband, father, and friend. He chose compassion, Florence Kramer, 1847–1921. Beloved wife, mother, and teacher. She chose courage, and below both names, carved into the stone, together they chose love. The Kramer ranch continued for generations, but it was the story of Benjamin and Florence that endured most of all. The story of a cowboy who had the courage to do what was right, and a woman who had the strength to build a beautiful life from the ashes of betrayal. The story of how one act of kindness can change everything, how love can bloom in the most unlikely places, and how two broken people can make each other whole. Their legacy lived on not just in the horses that bore their brand or the land that bore their name, but in the values they instilled in every generation that followed: compassion, integrity, hard work, and above all, the belief that every person deserves to choose their own path and be treated with dignity and respect. And so the story ends, not with tragedy or uncertainty, but with love triumphant, with a life well lived and a legacy that endures, with two souls who found each other against all odds and chose, every single day, to build something beautiful together. The cowboy had outbid them all and set her free, but the real magic was not in the transaction, it was in everything that came after. In the partnership they built, the family they raised, the love they shared. In 43 years of choosing each other, supporting each other, and building a life that proved love could conquer even the darkest circumstances, in the end, Florence Oakley Kramer had not just survived. She had thrived. She had loved and been loved. She had built something beautiful from nothing. And she had proven that freedom is not just about breaking chains. It is about having the courage to build the life you want with someone who believes in your worth as much as you learn to believe in it yourself. That is the legacy of Benjamin and Florence Kramer. That is the story of how a cowboy's compassion and a woman's courage combined to create something extraordinary. That is the proof that even in the wild and often brutal West, love could still find a way to bloom and flourish and endure forever.